Behind me is St Patrick's old graveyard, and we're about to find out more with local historian Michael McPhillips. Michael, we're here in St Patrick's old graveyard in Donagh. Firstly, Donagh. What's the origins of the name?
Well, Donagh or Donagh in Irish, the place of the church, and there'll be dozens of places throughout Ireland. I suppose what stands out for me would be Donagh Moor in Tyrone, yes. Big church. So the word Donagh in a lot of areas, including here, is associated with the time of St Patrick. So we wouldn't be exaggerating here in this ancient parish of Galloon to say that St Patrick would have been here. So over 1500 years, this site here would have been a place of worship.
Now, the origins of the graveyard itself, how old are the headstones? How old is the oldest headstone?
Well, the inscriptions go back over 300 years. The oldest is a Bridget Kiernan from 1700, and it's in Latin. And then there's a Peter Sharkey from 1707. He died at the age of 46. So to go from that right up until there will still be old families of the area still bury. So your local names like the Gleasons and the Lynches and Maguires, they all still would bury in some of the old graves here. So from 1700 right up to modern day would be the inscriptions on the headstones.
There would have originally been a church on this site, and you made quite an exciting discovery in the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, there would be mapped medieval ruin in this area, the upper part of the graveyard. And some years ago, I discovered by walking over it, and it rocked, was the arch of, I suppose, probably a gable wall of the building. Now, it wouldn't have been a big church, but it would have been dated from the medieval period, and in 1507, during the Maguire and McMahon rebellions, the McMahons arrived down from Monaghan and they burnt it. And in the Inquisition papers of 1607, it just describes it as a roofless church with an adjoining graveyard from 1607. So certainly the graveyard holds a lot of history.
Now, when we were chatting earlier on, you mentioned penal priests. There are 3 penal priests buried here. Yes,
from that dark period of Irish history, there is a Father Philip McElgunn, where just what is the remnants of the old church on the upper part. There's a Felix Mulligan, and here in the left corner next to the clubhouse is a Father Patrick Kieran. And possibly it was Cairns would have been his name, but the story told about him was that he would have been like all other priests of the time, on the run, and he lived on a lake out beside Crum called the Friars Loch or Lake. And on the 1st of February 1747 he was killed, and it's believed that his remains here are headless, because in them days there was a bounty on a priest's head, and a headhunter, a priest headhunter called Maxwell, was involved in the killing of him with English troops. About a mile up the Old Coach Road to Newton Butler, there's a small, dark, lonely little laneway, and today it's still called the Butcher's Lane, and is associated with the killing of Father Patrick Cairn.
There are some famous connections here as well, on up in the corner.
Yes, and only in recent times, during the summer there, 2 Americans arrived into the area, and they were looking into connections with the famous American author F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it was only then, in fact, I discovered through the Lanahans, who were his grandchildren, that F. Scott Fitzgerald's grandfather was Philip McQuillan, and he left here in 1843 and went to America, and it was his daughter who was the mother of the great Gatsby author F. Scott Fitzgerald.
The headstones make great reading, but people were very lucky to make it past 50 years of age.
Well, I suppose in them days the mortality rate would have been quite low compared to nowadays. And if you do scan through them, you'll see people living just into the late 40s or early 50s. And a selection of the older ones. On the back of them have those old mortality symbols, the skull, the crossbone, the egg timer and the coffin, all symbols of death. Very few actually graveyards, particularly here in Fermanagh, have them, but here in Donagh we're lucky enough that the very old ones have those symbols.
Now, up in the far back corner there's a World War I grave.
Yes, and again, it shows you the hundreds of years of history that exists in this one graveyard. You go from the penal days. Here we have a H. Goodwin, who died in the First War in 1918. And also up until modern times, we also have the grave of local man Louis Leonard, who was murdered during the Troubles. And he was a well-known character in the area and a great footballer. And his grave is here from 1972. So there's 300 years of history in this small graveyard of our local community.
Our many thanks to Michael McPhillips, brilliant local historian, and we chatted for a further half an hour.